Hello folks, Larry here again with Curiomechanics. Today we're going to do a video in a series I'm going to call Restore and Explore on a Gateway G6 350. Let's start with a little background on a company that I've always had a special fondness for, that gave the big names a run for their money and created some much needed competition in a space that directly helped push the personal computer into every home. The year is 1985, and in a computer store in Des Moines, Iowa, a clerk named Ted was learning the ropes of the industry. After 9 months, he decided he had had enough experience to start his own PC sales company. He had had some college, but had dropped out twice to go back and work on his family's farm. His vision was to sell mid-range home computers using an educated sales staff and reduce overhead by doing so over the telephone. He took out a $10,000 loan from his grandmother and got to work. Initially, the small company began working on software and accessories for the Texas Instruments computers and was named TIPC. The scrappy little enterprise managed to garner $100,000 in sales in its first 4 months. They quickly began to experiment with creating their own line of machines. By the end of 1986, they changed their name to Gateway 2000 and had achieved $1 million of income. Their computers offered a complete package, including a monitor, and gave customers a turnkey solution to get a computer up and running at a lower cost than most of the established competitors. By 1988, they had grown to $12 million in revenue. Their computers were built with parts sold on the open market and required less R&D than a lot of companies in their space. Continuing to flourish, in 1990, the company moved to South Dakota because of the lack of state taxes. They also began to embrace the now familiar cow branding, as their ads had fun with the concept of a high-tech giant coming up in a rural area. By the end of 1992, Gateway 2000 had crossed the $1 billion mark in sales. They continued to grow and expand their operations, but were still being driven by the philosophy that had brought them up to this point: build a good system at a good price. As their expansion continued, they continued to diversify their operations and in 1996 got even deeper into the multimedia scene by creating a home theater computer. In 1997, they purchased Amiga and started to move towards better offerings of workstations and servers for their corporate clients. They also began to shy away from their cow branding to try to appeal to their more serious big clientele. In 1998, Gateway 2000 dropped the 2000 from their name, as the upcoming change of century might be perceived as obsolete. They also continued to solidify their foothold in the multimedia arena and kept developing the home theater PC with internet connectivity, which sadly was too far ahead of its time to see widespread adoption. I personally would love to get my hands on one of their home entertainment center computers just for the cool factor. I suspect with a good network card hooked to a NAS media server, it could still serve as a functional part of the entertainment experience. This is where the G6 350 makes its entrance. The company is now showing sales in the multiple billions, and it's working its way into the list of top computer manufacturers. By 2001, Gateway had become the number 4 PC company in the world. Dabbling in the internet even got them to create their own internet subscription service and eventually form a partnership with AOL. By 2004, they had purchased one of their strongest competitors, E-Machines. However, by this time, they were beginning to feel the strains of competition and market changes. This decline led them to eventually be purchased by Acer in 2007, who continues to hold the rights to this day. Fast forward to 2020, and Acer decided to rekindle the brand and begin selling Gateway machines exclusively at Walmart. Even though it's almost 20 years later, the reputation and loyalty Gateway had built up was considered enough of an asset to hinge an entire new venture on. I've always been one to root for the underdog, and that's what makes me so fond of Gateways. They started with a good, well-built product, treated their customers fairly, supported their equipment well, and did so at a price that made sense. From its humble beginnings in an Iowa cattle barn to becoming a globally household name, Gateway is a PC company that deserves its place in history. So that's the background on the company and this particular machine that was built in the prime years of their expansion and manufacturing prowess. Let's finally get to the machine itself and see if we can bring this one back to a condition that makes it a useful and desirable device to have around. We're going to start by adding some mass storage and doing some housekeeping inside and cleaning the case. Then I can install the software and configure it for convenient usage. Let's get to it. Alright, we're going to do a little swapperino here. We're going to take out this network card that's in there and replace it with a different one. The Netgear one that's in there, apparently if it gets too many fragmented packets, can goof up your network, so I don't think we want that to happen. So I went ahead and ordered a new old stock replacement. It is just a 10100, but with Windows 98, that's definitely the best you're going to hope for. So we'll get that guy out of there. This motherboard does have a PCI slot, so makes it pretty easy to find replacements. She does have a pair of 16-bit ISA, but running Windows 98, there's no problem using the plug-and-play type interfaces. But there we go. You say it is a new old stock, so we'll get the drivers in there. Once we get her set up, I will not be hooking up the Wake on LAN cord because I don't know of anybody that really thinks that's beneficial. And that's it. Snap, click. Let's get that screw back in there. So if you're a little aggressive with the network cable, you won't pop it out of the socket for the PCI. There we go. Motherboard is very clean, but I'm going to go ahead and change the battery and just give it a quick blow down and make sure there's no dust hiding in the nooks and crannies. So I'll be right back with the equipment to do that. Alright, and we're back. We've got a nice shiny Toshiba 2032, so that should work out great. Not some of those cheap batteries I find don't tend to have much actual good stuff in them, so they don't last too long. So I do try to buy name brand batteries when I'm replacing a CMOS battery. Let's see how many tries it takes to actually get that out of there. That wasn't too terrible. So out with the old. And of course you do want to follow the polarity recommendations. In most cases they're always positive up, but there we go. Now let's just give her a little quick air down. I will be cleaning up probably a little bit better, but this will get rid of some of the big pieces. Only other thing I want to mention is when you do get a machine or a if you do pick up a blower, make sure it's rated to be ESD, electrostatic discharge safe, because otherwise it can build up a pretty good amount on the plastic when it's spinning that fan, and then that static will carry over into the air and can cause a problem. I've been pretty lucky most of the time, and I find that if you keep yourself grounded, that tends to help a little bit. But like I said, if you do pick up an air machine, just be aware of that. Looks pretty good in there, actually. I've already kind of inspected it for capacitors or anything that I think might be a real big problem, and I don't see anything. So we're probably pretty close to being able to run this thing through its final testing and maybe have some fun with it. So it also does need a very good cleaning. This one kind of picked up on purpose just because it did look so dirty. I thought that it would probably be fun to watch the before and after. So, but here's that netgear that I've been warned about. This is a 511 chipset, and I think that's the one that exhibits the problems. But like I say, the word on the street at least is that if there's fragmented packets, it can take your whole network down, and it's a bummer. So in the bin she goes. Bye bye. Alright, so that thing's in the trash, and here's what we've replaced it with. A good brand name. I've always had great luck with US Robotics. Back in the day, they made an awful lot of modems for ISPs and seem to be able to hold their own. This does also advertise that it's got Windows 98 drivers, so when the time comes, I'll be able to, well, download them. Because there's nothing in the box. You'd think new old stock would include the driver disk, but that shouldn't be too much trouble. There's that wake on LAN cord, which is going kaput. But in any case, that's the only card that we're going to be replacing. I have removed the modem. Again, in today's day and age, I don't think they do us any good at all. The other card that's in there is an ATI Rage, which has the video capture and the video output. I believe it was also called the All-in-Wonder, but I'm not sure on exactly how they did their naming, but it's a pretty capable card. And then I did put in an CF to IDE adapter, so the hard drive was actually running off a compact flash card. I do that on most of the machines that I restore just because it's a lot more flexible, a lot more reliable. It does take away kind of that fun vintage hard drive grind sound, but it also lets you kind of try out different scenarios without having too much recovery time. So a lot of people like to run different configurations. I find that to be one of the easiest. So I just, like I said, I pick up a lot of these IDE to compact flash adapters. I've also had SD card adapters. One thing about that is you do want to use industrial flash cards. They are formatted a little bit different, built a little bit different, but they're better able to handle the task. So again, just reminder, compact flash cards, look for an industrial one. So, but that's all we got in there right now. We've got the ATI Rage 3, we've got the compact flash adapter, and then we've got our newly installed network card. We'll also be getting a blanking plate and filling that hole. Not too super worried about it, but I do think that with airflow, it helps a little. And this one does have the directed vent for the processor. It's actually coming, I'm not sure if it's from or to the power supply, but in either case, long term, that's probably not the greatest design just because of the extra heat load on one of the two components. But it does have a knockout for an 80mm fan, so I'll probably actually be putting that on there. There's my kitchen clock announcing the time, so don't mind the birds. That one actually chimes a bird every hour on the hour, but like I say, I think we're pretty close to putting this thing into what I'd call its final readiness. state, and I have tested both the compact disc drives, but I still have to test the floppy drive. Depending on how it sounds, I may or may not take it out and clean it. A lot of times I'll lube up the rails and just clean the heads, but once you've done this for a little while, you can definitely tell just by the sound if they need to be addressed or not. So I'll give it a listen. The drive sounded good, and like I said, this machine's actually really clean for its vintage. So, but that's like I say, we'll keep pushing forward. Alright, I have decided that we're going to put in one of these super awesome high quality LED fans. The early Pentium series ran pretty warm, so I figure with the way this is set up, it can't hurt to get a little more case ventilation, a little more airflow going. Unfortunately, it's such a high quality model, they didn't include any screws. So we're gonna see if I can get creative. Most of the newer fans, they actually have self-tapping screws that'll go directly into the body, but this one kind of an acrylic, so I'm thinking it may or may not be the most robust material. I do have either the 3 or 4 wire. Looks like I have a little low and a high, so I can adjust the speed. But we're just going to be using a standard Molex connector, nothing fancy. And we're going to blow it in, so it'll go towards the radiator. But let's see what we can do about mounting this guy. Okay, screw holes are not the right size, so I may have to do a little bit of fishing to get this guy to work right, but for now, let's just check the fit and the orientation. Looks like we'll be fine, and I'll probably just let the speed control hang on the inside. So let me go fishing. I'll probably come up with some nut and screw assemblies, but we'll be back in a minute when I have the right tools, toys, equipment. Alright, I've got some actual fan screws here. These are what they look like. They're a little bit thicker than your normal screw, and they're quite a bit more coarsely threaded, but they are kind of standard issue, so we're lucky in this case, no problem. The other thing to point out, not sure how well you're going to be able to see it, but in fact, let me remember to actually turn on my light. See if that helps us at all. Not really. But there's a little arrow right on the top that will show you the direction that the fan is blowing. So that's how I know in this case it's going to be moving it into the case. But these are always fun to get started. You just got to be kind of gentle. Like I said, this is an acrylic material, so if they start snapping, okay, I guess 3 is always good. And just kind of get them to grab, and hopefully she'll go in there eventually. Feels like it's pretty big for the hole it's going into, but hopefully once it starts to cut some threads, it'll bite in there. Not looking too promising. See if I can trick it and get a little more bite on it. So now we should have some threads cut in the fan housing. If you can hear the fan noise, I apologize. I'm making some nuggets in the air fryer because food is good. I like food. It's a habit my mother started me on years ago, and I haven't been able to kick it. There's that. Let's see if we can get her to grab now. One trick you always want to use when you're screwing into plastic, if you've got existing threads, run it backwards until you feel it click into the thread. If you always make new threads every time you use it, you're going to wind up kind of boogering up that hole pretty quick. So whenever I work with plastics, I always go backwards until I hear the click. But that's it. I'm only going to put 2 in there because it's plenty secure. And then, like I say, we just have our nice Molex connector, which is probably going to flippity flop all over the place. Well, that one actually feels pretty good. See what we can do for cable routing here. I am not generally too worried about cable routing. I know a lot of people get real worried about making them look pretty, but I just don't want to restrict any airflow. Oh, hey, there's the nuggets. But I just don't want to restrict the airflow. That's my usual goal with cable management. These older machines weren't the hottest to begin with as far as cable management. They tended to just sort of throw everything into a clump. So we'll leave sleeping dogs lie. But like I said, this one's got a rheostat for the fan speed. Looks like it was all the way on low. Sure, halfway, perfect. Like I said, this is just to generate that RGB look that the kids are all into these days. No, really, it's because it's blowing directly on the the CPU, and I'm just not a fan. Not a fan of using the power supply fan as our sole case cooling. Whether it's going in or out, the CPU is adding heat to the power supply, or the power supply is adding heat to the CPU. I just don't think that's optimal. And like I said, this is a Pentium, I believe Pentium 2. I know it's running at 350 megahertz, so And obviously it's got a giant heat sink on it, but with passive cooling, and some people leave their computers on for a real long time and different climates. You know, why make the problem potentially worse? Because if it happens, something does come along, it's usually kind of bad for the hardware. It doesn't just overheat and shut off on a lot of these older ones. It can continue to escalate until it hurts itself. The concept of thermal throttling is more robust these days, so I'd trust a newer CPU a lot better. But even those, I don't see any reason to cause a problem when you don't have to. So in any case, we got our little heat sink, or our little fan installed right in front of the CPU heat sink. It is blowing in. Again, I can see the little arrow telling me that, so I know I've got the right orientation. There is a little bit of a grill on the fan, so it's not a dust filter, it's just a very large foreign object protection, but it's good enough. Nobody's going to get their fingers in it or hurt themselves. So now I feel comfortable that we've satisfied that requirement. So in any case, the fan is in, and it has a nice blue glow. Oh boy, oh boy. Not really. RGB I think is fun, but it's first of all, it's kind of inappropriate in this vintage machine. They hadn't gone down that road, and this was made as more of a entire family machine versus, say, a kid's bedroom. But it is, it's a matter of personal taste. But in this case, it just came with the fan, so we'll leave it in there. What the heck, a little cool glow never hurt anybody. So in any case, I'm rambling, let's move forward. Alright, we're just gonna give this thing a nice scrubbing. There's quite a few little marks on it, so we're gonna try some different techniques and see what we have the most luck with. Just starting out with some 409 basic all-purpose cleaner. Seems to be doing okay, but there is quite a few spots that will need some attention. Sorry for the wiggling, but she's gonna take some elbow grease. Sides are a little bit yellowed. Looks like they're getting the big chunks off. The internet said that you can have some luck with OxyClean, so pick some of that up in a spray bottle, so we may give that a shot. I didn't want to mix it ahead of time because I didn't know how long the oxygen releasing reaction actually lasts, but I'm figuring if it's like a soda bottle, you don't want to let it go flat before you drink it. So, but doing pretty decent. Let's stick a switch. Not quite sure the significance of that sticker, but I suppose we'll leave that one on there. I do try to keep as many of the original markings. Well, you got some of the big chunks off. Let's try switching to regular alcohol, pure rubbing alcohol. See how lucky we get with some of the sticker residue here. Some good old Walmart brand alcohol. Usually I find with any solvent, if you give it a little bit of time to kind of melt the schmutz, you have better luck. So usually I'll put it on and just kind of work it in a little bit, but it seems to be doing pretty good for that spot that we had there. I know a lot of people go straight to Magic Eraser. I try to save that for last resort just because it is a tiny bit more abrasive and it can actually sand the finish off, and so depending on how close you're looking at it, you can kind of come up with some uneven surfaces, texture, but don't usually have that problem with liquid solvents. You know, baking soda, toothpaste, or a couple other pretty common ones that both seem to be fairly effective. Well, we are at least making a little bit of headway. Again, sorry for the wiggling, but you gotta put some pressure on these. There's some pretty serious marks. But in a lot of cases, what most people consider scratches are really just material that's been ground into the finish. So usually with a little bit of buffing you can get lucky and pull some of them out. Not always, but sometimes. A little bit more liberal. This looks like it might wind up being an actual scratch in the finish. Once in a blue moon too, depending on the paint that they use, you can kind of get lucky and melt the paint surrounding it and it'll fill in the slot. But I always try to work from as gentle and gently as I need to start off, and then we can get more aggressive. It's not getting anywhere. In this case, I think it might actually be filling in with some of the surrounding paint. But at the end of the day, that's okay too. That's gonna look fine once it dries up. And unfortunately, with the age of these machines, they never necessarily come back completely perfect. You say this one, you got some pretty noticeable yellowing here, and I'm not a huge fan of Retro Bright, just because I feel that it degrades the plastic even more sometimes. And for maybe some of you who don't know any different, the yellowing is usually caused by a UV reaction with the plastics that they use. Some are more susceptible than others depending on the formulation, but it's really a deterioration of the plastic from what I understand. And so That's part of why I'm not a big fan of retrobrite, is I feel that because of the way polymers work, if it breaks down even more of the molecular structure, although it may look more appealing, it's actually causing it to be more susceptible in the future. Several different types of polymer blends are used, and without enough long-term experience, I have a hard time saying for sure which ones would be a better candidate. So, like I say, in my case, I tend to avoid it. If somebody else wants to do that, they're certainly welcome to. I'm not saying it's a terrible idea. I'm saying that I just don't want to cause the process to accelerate next time, and I have most definitely seen that happen with other people's experiments. So even though it took 40 years to get to this condition, or in this guy's case 30, it can come back within 3 or 4 years, and that's definitely not the look you want. I try to build for the long haul, and I'd like to think if I made it this far, I'd like it to make at least that far again. I do tend to modernize some of the components, most especially the hard drives and the internal storage, and that's to maximize that longevity. Old hard drives are great, but they weren't known for their super long-term lifespans. And once you put this much time and effort into getting one dialed in the way you like it, even though it's not necessarily irrecoverable data, you don't want to be doing that every couple of years either. So that's why I try to find a storage solution that I think's at least got 10 years in it. I think that's a fair threshold for any storage medium. And even CDs and DVDs, a lot of times you say, well, I got the backup discs, and you find out that, well, the dye you used or the conditions it was made to survive, those don't last forever either. So the more you can hedge your bets against the future, the better. And like I say, the finish is obviously just aesthetic, but I find that I like to take as much pride as I can in the finished result, and then I feel like I've done the best I can to bring it back to what you would have brought home and taken out of the box all those many years ago and been proud of. Or at least used until the next model came out, because some of these were pretty quickly circumvented by different models. Back in the 90s, the progression was relatively fast. But so look at that, ladies and gentlemen. I had some pretty good luck. I forgot I mentioned I was going to try the OxyClean. The alcohol soaking really didn't do anything, so I just gave this generic oxygen whitening powder a shot, and freely admit it was probably the abrasive of the granules that did the bulk of the work. But hey, when you get down to not having too many other choices, I'd say it did a pretty good job. So there we go. OxyClean apparently did some good. So I'd say it turned out real nice. So there we go. Case is now cleaned. Alright, so we've made it to the desktop. Let's get some quality of life going on here and install the USB drivers for Windows 98. I have burned many CDs in the past. copy stuff over, but I find the USB much more pleasant and a whole lot more environmentally friendly. But these particular drivers, I believe I've gotten off of Phil's Computer Lab, who is a very helpful resource for a lot of old files. But got them installed, and now we're rebooting. There's the Gateway logo right at startup. I thought that was kind of cool. They baked it right into the BIOS. And a quick system inventory just to see what's going on. And of course, Windows 98 still works a little bit differently with drivers, but she'll flash through and then we'll be able to get some more stuff set up. But this USB driver, of course, I have to install off a CD because you can't use the USB till you have USB, but there we go. So USB, very, very handy, and there's all the good stuff that goes with it. So now we've got that one in the bag. Let's move on to our next little project. After we click cancel 100 times because we were trying to access a drive that didn't have a disk in it. But there's our newly inserted USB drive. This is a 32 gig drive, so it certainly supports a large enough stick to be useful. And they're gonna try to follow the directions for that network card, and not having much luck. So like I said, I pulled up the actual installation instructions, double checked the driver to make sure I had the right one. So this is kind of another sign of trouble here. This is actually more than not the first time I tried to get it going, and it just seems to be misbehaving. So but like I say, I followed the directions to the letter, and the good old internet, you gotta tell it you have a LAN, and that's how you want to connect. You don't want to use dial-up. And I think that's pretty telling of the vintage of Windows 98 in general. But here we go. So we've got the network pointed to, or the internet pointed to the network, and of course nothing happens because of course the network I have it plugged into is air gapped from the real internet. There's no way I'm putting a Windows 98 machine on the real world. But let's just go in and see if we can real quick check that the adapter picked up a DHCP address from my little server I've got running for that one, and nope. So I'm thinking that card is no good. I'm gonna probably just pull it out. So much for new in box. Thanks, eBay. So let's move over to some other stuff. We've got SciSoft Sandra, for anybody who remembers that. This was a pretty handy utility and was quite the big deal back in the day. It will give us a nice system inventory, which is going to show us a lot of stuff we already knew, but it's still good to see a breakdown. And if you're really interested, you can pause the video at any point and look at most of the goodies. This is the system summary, and a pretty complete list. So we're looking through that, and then we're going to take a look at the motherboard itself. And we'll see in there that it was manufactured by Intel. So Gateway used Intel boards, which is actually very, very good, because I've always thought Intel boards are extremely reliable and well built, and obviously pretty compatible with Windows itself. And they did sneak a few features in here I'm not used to seeing on an Intel board, but we'll get to that. So let's run a quick CPU benchmark and just see where we're at in relationship to the rest of the world. Hey, what do you know? 350 doesn't perform as well as a 1 gigahertz or a multi-core. But it's, I guess, doing something. So that's a good sign. But not incredible results, but not the worst either. This will be testing the MMX instructions and some of the multimedia capabilities. And, well, boo. Not amazing, but like I say, if you look at the machines it's comparing it to, it's not even a fair fight. This Windows 98 lasted quite a bit into the future. And so it's got a wide range of competition, let's just put it that way. But let's run a disk test on that compact flash card, and well, I guess the controller is doing okay. It's registering as a EIDE comparable drive, so the flash isn't holding it back too much, and the interface is doing fine. So if you get a super fast card, you should get decent performance, although this entire time I'd say the machine's quite snappy, and I'm really not complaining. So let's get some work done. One thing that I think we might as well put on there for the future user is Java. It has its place, and even back in that vintage, there were some applications that took advantage of it. It's also nice that it's platform independent. So once you get a Java applet, it's pretty easy to move around, depending on, of course, the vintage it was compiled under. But hey, we'll throw Java on there just to be kind of helpful. And so, of course, you change something, you've got to restart. This is another disk benchmark, and single digit megabytes per second. Well, maybe I don't have the fastest flash card in there. I'll be honest, it's not any particular brand name. It's just an industrial card. Let's try some 3D stuff. Let's try 3D Mark. For those of you who remember the back in the day, this was quite the interesting and fun test to watch. And it's doing its thing. The only thing I'd mention is, you see, it doesn't do bump mapping, but I believe that was exclusive to Voodoo or 3DFX. But the only other thing here is, if you notice, as the pixel count goes up on these textures, it actually runs faster, which I thought was unusual. But hey, I'm not a graphics programmer, so no idea there. But we're nearly there. Oh, there we go. Okay, that's actually, well, it's at least 4-digit number. I'm not actually sure if those are great or terrible results, but it did finish the test, so it's just got the modern DirectX capabilities. At least I believe that's DirectX 6. Let's try some wavetable MIDI. That's always fun. Being a multimedia machine, they put in the ability to have some pretty decent MIDI sound, which makes your games more interesting, of course. And if you're a goofball like me, you probably still actually play an occasional MIDI just because I think they're cool. And I remember when those were the deal. And if you had download, they sure were a lot less painful than MP3s. But like I said, full wavetable, at least in Windows. I did not get to test it in DOS because my capture device went crazy. But let's take a listen here to the Sugar Plum Fairy for a second. And I think those are pretty decent tones. Gonna talk a little bit in case it's copyrighted, but I doubt it. I hope not. So there we go. So we've got the MIDI thing going, and it's performing quite well. Like I say, I find it rather pleasing. Again, being multimedia, they did put in the ATI with the TV tuner and MPEG capabilities, and so for its vintage, this is actually a very capable card. They also put in a sound system that does have Sound Blaster DOS emulation, so I think that's really, really cool. It's got an official dedicated DMA channel and an interrupt request, and of course 220 and 330 on the ports. So I'm thinking most, at least DOS window games, should work pretty well. I think you'll have some good compatibility, which I think is actually the sweet spot for this machine. Let's test out the floppy drive. As I mentioned before, I hadn't really gone through it too hard, but we'll do some basic testing on it. So obviously it's reading it. Let's try a copy and paste, and hey, let's test with a file called test. That seems appropriate. So we'll put that guy in my documents, and there it is. So that seems to work. And there's a trick here. If you want something to go directly to delete, not recycle bin, hold shift when you either click delete on the menu or hit your delete key on your keyboard. But holding shift tells Windows to actually delete it, not just send it to the recycle. So little tip there. Just for fun, let's see if we can run a check disk or scan disk, now it's become, and see if there's any issues with the controller, the head's reading, and looks like we're doing good here. So ta-da, did not find any errors. I'd say that this disk drive is behaving well, but we'll try one more little quick test. We'll open up a README and just make sure it's not all scrambled, which I don't think could happen, but hey, it says README, so I'm going to read it. There it is. We're reading the README. Oh, wow. Ooh. But the floppy drive is working just fine, so that pretty much takes care of all the drives and the peripherals. So let's celebrate with some 2 Live Crew. This is an MP3 actually, and it's a 320 kilobit, I believe. So pretty impressive. But we're mostly done here, so 2 Live. All right, well, let's throw some ponies at dawn at it, which is I know for a fact a higher compression wave or MP3, higher bit rate. There we go. And of course the copyright problem. So jump. There it is. All right, well, let's put this one in the bag and let's watch a movie. Let's fire up the ATI tuner or player app, which is capable of opening MPEG. So sweet. Let's find an old horror movie and indulge ourselves and celebrate. And if I remember how to open a file here any second. No, not that one. There it is. And I have no idea on the encoding on this file, to be totally honest with you. It's just something I grabbed at random out of my collection, but nope, stuck. So overall, for a 350 megahertz system with 64 megs of RAM, I think is doing very, very well. I think Gateway built a great machine and put as much in there as they could, and considering the pricing, I think they really did a good job of trying to satisfy the needs of the world. And 98 existed, well, Windows in general existed in such a transition period in computers. They were moving from the home, and we're still pretty new. Most people didn't know them intuitively like they do now, and so I think this genre of machine, I think, is best used as a DOS box. If it were something I was going to keep, I'd probably throw a Sound Blaster in one of the slots and possibly a better video card, but it is a GP2, so nothing amazing. But for its place in history, I think it did very well. Like I said, I think Gateway really knocked it out of the park with this one. I've enjoyed restoring it, and I think for the right person who knows what to expect from it, 98 is almost a convenience. I would not call it a Windows gaming machine, but it certainly fills the bill for a lot of people and a lot of needs. So if you made it to the very end, I appreciate you watching. This has been kind of a different format I'm trying out. Let me know in the comments how I did, what you'd like to see more of or less of, and most of all, enjoy your day.